All right. This is Landry.Audio. I hope that you're having a good day today. And if you're not, maybe we can make it just a little bit better. Um, like every other channel in the social media space these days, we ask you to like, follow, subscribe, and comment, which helps our content perform better through engagement on these platforms. Today is episode 59 with, I guess for lack of a better term, MMA historian Sonny Brown these days. I've been watching his content for the last few years, and it is really one of the there's a lot of channels out there like Modern Mixed Martial Artist. Uh, Trying to think of some other guys off the top of my head, but I've really found Sonny's content to really sort of be at the apex of understanding how we integrate grappling in terms of MMA, where I guess in a lot of traditional ways, we either look at kickboxing and Muay Thai and then potentially taking it to the ground game. But he's done a fantastic job of merging the worlds into the clinch game, and also more recently digging up long lost archive footage to share it with us. And it turns out he's only about an hour down the road from us. He's in North City. I'm in the great city of Newcastle, Australia. So how are we today, Sonny?
Yeah, doing pretty well. Great way to start the week.
Yeah,
Thanks
excellent.
for having me on also.
It is a Monday morning, so this is the first thing that I'm doing today before I try to get through my workday and then take the kids to swimming. So this will be the start of it. Um, a lot of things to talk about. I guess for people, as more of an introduction, you were a former fighter yourself. We were on, I guess, kind of around it at roughly the same time, come through roughly the same BJJ lineage, and you're now at the point of opening up your own school. So why don't you take us through a little bit of that journey and I guess the headaches associated with that?
Yeah, so the school that we've opened up, it's called Apex MMA, and my previous instructor, Anthony Lange, had retired. So we took that as an opportunity to open up a school of our own. So it's myself and Nick Pudney, who's another one of his longtime black belts, and Chad Lumley. And yeah, it's been quite a headache just to get things up and running and find a place and make it all happen in a relatively fast amount of time since we found out about a retirement, and just to get it all going and finding the building and then stripping it out and painting everything and making it look like a gym where people are welcome at and can train and learn martial arts rather than the old air conditioning factory that it used to be.
Fair enough. For people that aren't too familiar, I guess traditionally with the old school of the Australian Jiu-Jitsu scene, it's Anthony Lange is one of those old school names. As I said, I came over here in 2004, so he's one of the first names I heard, along with like John Donahue and John Will. So how far back does he extend into this? Because he's one of the original Machado guys over here, isn't he?
Yeah, 100%. So he was, I think, the first like MMA school in Sydney, training jiu-jitsu and everything. But his first fight was in Shuto in 1995. So he'd been training prior to that, and then I think he opened up first in his backyard shed, then a school hall, and then finally moving into the premises that he ended up finishing at in the early 90s pretty much. So a lot of history, and he was there for pretty much all of the firsts that happened in Australian MMA and jiu-jitsu. Even of course having Elvis coaching Elvis and taking him over to the UFC 30 where he beat Jeremy Horn, and just a lot of the firsts then associated with that as well, because of course Elvis is a ton of firsts.
Indeed, he is. That's the gym, and how I effectively ended up in Australia and Sydney at the time was I think I've told the story a couple times, but when I decided to get involved in the sport, I was training in Calgary, where I'm from. But we had one of the was it Cage Combat, the first one that he fought on with like Mario Sperry.
Very, yeah.
And who was referee? I think Cameron Quinn, the
Hmm.
karate black belt, was the referee for that, and that's where I first found about it. And was like, well, I'll end up in Sydney, affiliated with SPMA back in the day in 2004, and carried through with them, and then moved on with Anthony Perosh beyond that. So that's kind of my story. What was the litmus for you to get involved in the sport originally?
Yeah, so I had actually had an experience where I was attacked in the street
Right.
one time, and quite suffered quite a lot of pretty bad damage. We had I was attacked walking home from a house party and had a fractured skull, a subdural
Really?
hematoma, like blood clot on the brain, and kind of lost my confidence very much. So quite nervous and anxiety, anxious after that. So a couple of years later, martial arts seemed like a good way to restore that confidence and be a bit more self-assured about my safety, just walking around the streets, unfortunately. Um,
Right.
and that eventually, I was lucky to just start training at Anthony's school from the get-go. Now, I'd seen it in the paper from when Elvis had fought Tito Ortiz for the heavy, I think light heavyweight
Light.
title, and so I kind of knew it was there, and it seemed like the best school in the area, as it did offer an actual MMA program, or shoot fighting it was called at the time. And that just kind of picked it up, started training, and then eventually just from training everything, and I was going doing 2 classes a day, 5 days, 6 days a week. They offered me a fight on just one of the amateur shows, and it was okay, I'll give it a shot, and then won that, which then means, well, better have another one, because winning was pretty good, and had another one, and it just kind of snowballed from there.
So what year did you originally begin training then?
I think it was 2007
Okay.
was the first year, so pretty. I think I was mid 20s, so pretty late in comparison to a lot of other people nowadays.
Yeah, right. Okay, cool. So how long has the gym been going for now since you set up?
It's only been about 2 months, I guess, moving into 3 months now, so still relatively in its infancy. But so far, things are promising in that new people are coming in and getting phone calls and a bit of interest around it. So it's and classes are going well. So it's been good so far.
Okay, cool. What's been working for you? I've some of the stories I've heard from other gym owners is there's a little bit of I don't know, I guess black science around how you market a martial arts gym these days.
Yes, I mean, so far it's just been through social media and word of mouth. We're holding off onto the advertising side of things just until we need to. And I mean, the main thing I'm trying to do is just present it as a welcoming and high level place to come and train as well. So welcoming to beginners, but knowing that through the process of following a structured beginners program, that people can maintain a high level of technical proficiency.
Mm.
But then a big thing to ensure that that happens is just trying to build the culture, or just nurture the culture, or let that continue as it is, into that kind of welcoming environment where everyone's kind of helping each other and lifting each other up.
Yeah, fair enough. So are you doing this full time now? A lot of gyms start out as sort of part-time endeavors where they open up in the evenings while you're working a normal 9 to 5. How has this been
Yes.
organized for you?
So still part-time, I guess you'd say. And then I would like to get to the point where I can make that decision, or that decision becomes a problem
Yeah.
to have to deal with. That would be good. But yeah, still just working at the gym every night, and then working a couple of days a week during the day.
Okay, cool. Um, as I said, I've really got a lot of appreciation for you in the breakdown videos that you do, and I find this sort of an interesting concept around gyms and how they market themselves these days. To me, MMA or mixed martial arts now is its own sport, truly. But I still find gyms, and I'm sure yours probably operates the same, is we will do 1 hour of Muay Thai and then we will do 1 hour of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And I think, as I said, through your videos, what I think is that what you've really done and what I appreciate is linking those two worlds together, about how we move from outside a distance to the clinch to taking it down, which goes beyond wrestling. I assume your gym's still doing the same thing, and perhaps it's a marketing thing, but why don't you think that there's a little bit more credence given to just doing MMA as its own sort of bona
Yeah.
fide lesson plan?
Yeah, so we do, I guess, the majority the same way as you've described. We've got a couple of dedicated MMA classes a week, which I take and do focus on those areas of, closing the distance, wall wrestling, and grapple boxing, which are, wholly unique to MMA. But I think the biggest thing is just even when people might have a idea that they want to try MMA or get into it, it's just the process of learning MMA as a whole, which is potentially 3 or 4 separate arts in one lesson, is it's just a lot more difficult than just focusing on the individual arts. So even now, like what we might find is people might come in with an intention to learn MMA, but then after doing a kickboxing lesson or a jiu-jitsu lesson, they find, one of those arts a bit more compatible with them, and they kind of filter off into doing that on its own. It's a bit easier to learn just a single art. It's also, there's generally more people in those classes, as there's more people just wanting to learn the single arts than to do MMA as a whole. And so it could even be a bit of a, self-perpetuating thing like that.
Mm. How long do you think it actually takes to learn MMA these days? And as you said, it really seems that people enter a gym and say, I want to do MMA, and then they end up doing either striking or BJJ. Very few people sort of become clinch fighters or
Yeah.
wrestlers in that respect. And I've always found that is really the linchpin to the game. It's like if you can get good at that, that's what allows you, as far as I'm concerned, to kind of move through there. A couple of years of striking, I think we know BJJ takes a little bit longer to become proficient in, but what is it? You reckon sort of like a 5-year plan to, I guess, sort of make you cage proficient or something along those lines?
Yeah, I'd say, and depending on the individual, particularly if someone's had a bit of athletic experience previously, but I reckon that 3 to 5 year mark, then they should be putting things together quite well. Maybe that 2 year mark is a good spot to be aiming for a bit of proficiency in amateur type areas. But that's another thing, is like those areas of clinch fighting, grapple boxing, they are a bit more, I'd say, tougher, or just a bit more visceral than
Confronting is the word
confronting.
I might
Yeah,
use.
that's a good one. Yeah, than some of the other, than the individual arts themselves. So that's another reason why people might shy away from it.
Mm. Do you notice that with female students as well? Because it traditionally, almost in like every gym I've been part of, it's been very hard to have female students continue to do BJJ. A lot of them seem really off-put by how in your face is the sport as compared to being able to, strike and retain distance or anything like that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's one thing that is a bit of a goal, is just to increase the uptake of female membership, just as I think it's a sign of a somewhat healthy gym. If, people, it's not being scared, if people aren't being scared away by some of those factors. And I mean, I understand it too. There's times when I'm doing jujitsu or something like that where it's a bit too confronting for me when, when you've got, someone massive sitting on top of you or something like that. So I get it and understand it. And I think it's just, as long as the intent and the culture of how how roles are going and stuff is right, then it's no problem. And that's really what the goal is, because you can still have tough roles with people, but that there's that intent behind things, where it's okay, we're just having fun and learning, versus they're really trying to be out to get you or something like that, which is like a necessary for a competition feel, or things like that, but doesn't necessarily have to be every single night.
Mm. How do you like to roll these days? Anth always told me, he goes, you're generally looking for 3 rolls when you get in the gym. You're looking for an easy roll, a hard roll, and you're equal. So that way you can develop your game against someone that's easy. You learn to survive against someone that's hard, and then effectively you put your best game up against someone who's on relative the same level as you.
Yeah, pretty much now. I mean, the majority of my roles is just focus number one on staying safe and just, making sure I can come back tomorrow. And then it's really just trying to implement whatever it is I'm working on or teaching or, going to be teaching next, and just having the opportunity to kind of put those in place. And then also now it's, trying to roll with as many people in the club as possible, just so everyone, I get to know people, and also get to, see where their games are at as well. So I can kind of get an understanding of where everyone's at.
Okay. You had, I want to say about 15 fights. Is that?
It's 11, I think, all up.
11. Okay. I guess at what point, you make the decision that this isn't for me anymore, or it's taking up too much of my time. At what point did that decision come for you?
So it was probably driving from the last fight in Wollongong to Royal North Shore Hospital in Sydney with a broken arm. So during that last fight, I blocked a kick, probably incorrectly, from a southpaw, and it broke my arm clean through. I kept fighting for maybe a minute or so after that. Knowing that where the pain was in the middle of the arm was probably broken. And then I got knocked out, unfortunately. And then as soon as I got backstage, I knew that the arm was broken, and thought, you know what, it's time to give it up. There's just too much time and effort and to put into preparation. And then the injury then took me, takes time to recover, and can't train, can't do anything. So that was the idea from there, to go into coaching.
Okay. I asked that question because I'm certainly not as experienced. I went through the same thing, though. I had my eye socket broken and ended up at Royal North Shore for doing the same thing overnight. But I think, we're the anomalies. What I mean by that is we are still the hangers on to a sport that we can't, participate or compete in anymore. What sort of kept your interest? Because as you know, a lot of people will do, the 3 to 4 years of hard, 2 years to learn the sport, a couple of years of competition. They go, I'm done with it. And then they just fall off the face of the planet. But there's guys like you and me still, I guess, pretending that we're younger than we are.
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think it's probably, and it's the same reasons I probably got involved, which when I started to enjoy the sport for itself, is, you can do it every night, rain, hail, or shine. It's also a good social thing. So, a lot of my friends now have come through training, and pretty much everyone I've met through doing martial arts are all, healthy, well-adjusted individuals who, enjoy other people's company. So, and then it's also just the pursuit of trying to still improve. So I think there could be a relationship to people who stick in martial arts and maybe a bit of perfectionism, and just trying to, okay, I've still got a certain area of the game to work on, and I want to keep trying to improve it. And while it's, in some ways, actually, it might be healthier just to let some things go in that regard. Here I am still trying to improve every week, essentially.
We talked about this very, very briefly before we turn on the recorder. How do you think that affects us as we get older? As an example, it's like if you're not practicing the high kick doesn't work anymore. It starts to look fairly poor. You start to lose your balance associated with it, and that flows on to many, many other aspects. So when you talk about improvement, what do you think that means as you get older and you can do less and less?
Yeah, so I mean, now the big thing is, I guess, improvement in coaching, and part of that then is knowledge of either particular techniques or particular coaching methods, and just trying to, improve then. So it can be either like reflection on how classes went, or just trying to gather new knowledge of techniques and their implementations in live situations. So while even now it's, I have to recognize that some parts of the game won't be for me in either, like high kicks. I'm not trying to do this Van Damme splits or anything like that. But just having that knowledge of, if someone does have that flexibility, okay, how can we tell them how to implement it successfully, from scratch, and then how to implement it into live sparring situations, and just being able to help them improve with their own goals really is that now how I'm trying to, improve myself.
Mm. It's sort of, I guess we're sort of rolling into how I originally found out about you because I can't remember where it was. I want to say maybe about 5 years ago, I started seeing your Sonny Brown content pop up. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think maybe the first ones that I saw were the pure MMA clinch game stuff of like Fedor breakdowns, Randy
Yeah.
breakdowns. Did a really good one with Linlin, which I think he even acknowledged, which was great to see and recognize. So, at what point did you decide that you're going to start, I guess, analyzing this content and sharing it?
Yeah. So I guess it probably would have been around the same time that I stopped fighting and decided I wanted to coach. So it was part of that process, realizing actually that, okay, if I rewind, I think at first when I started coaching, I probably only felt comfortable showing strictly moves that I had pulled off in live competition. Because I thought that in terms of credibility, that should be the only stuff that I can show. Now, of course, I wasn't a encyclopedia of moves that I had actually managed to perform successfully. So I soon realized, okay, well, how am I going to feel justified in showing something that I haven't pulled off successfully in live competition?
Mm.
And I guess going into the breakdown area was part of that. If I have enough knowledge of the topic, and then could then pull it off in just a sparring session or something like that, then I would feel comfortable showing it. So I'd seen like Jack Slack, BJJ Scout, Lawrence Kenshin, Brendan Dorman was another guy. They had their videos online doing breakdowns, and I figured that I would like to give one a shot, and just started to develop it from there. So the reason those ones were starting off with, I guess, the clinch game and things like that, was because those were the things that I was wanting to be teaching and showing people as the kind of glue between the different arts within MMA is what I
Mm.
felt would make MMA lessons unique enough that could separate it from from a pure striking, pure grappling, or pure wrestling class.
I agree with you. That's what I really find interesting is, like when you go back and watch old Fedor footage, the way that he overextends himself into body locks and trip takedowns, and same with Couture trying to just find to be able to do trip takedowns and stuff. Did you know at the time, because I've still learned a lot from your breakdown videos as well. So did you all know all this? Because I've had to do completely separate interviews with, wrestling historians and other fighters to better understand, folk style, how that rolled into professional wrestling, how, as you probably know now, how BJJ, we're starting to find out, actually came out of catch in a lot of respects. And I guess a lot of things uh, that most people really would be completely unaware of, and especially over on this side of the world.
Yeah, so I guess I can't remember exactly how I ended up finding that out. So one thing I did start doing too was just collecting old instructional books. One of the first, when I was like doing the Fedor book, there was a great series of books by a company called Victory Belt Publishing that is probably the best martial arts technique books I think that have ever been published. Especially in the modern era, and had Anderson Silva, BJ Penn, Fedor, Randy Couture, Matt Linlin had a great book as well. And so part of it was, buying those books. And then as I started looking for, martial arts instructional books, eventually find some of the old catch wrestling ones and think, oh, what's this? And then, I guess that was probably the start of going down that rabbit hole, because it doesn't take long before you realize how, how interesting it is that these things are so interconnected, but probably not as well known, or referenced, or kind of swept under the rug a little bit.
Mm. Well, when it comes to grappling, and I guess BJJ is what we're both a little bit more well known on. I mentioned this to you at the start. It seems that, at least in my experience, is that you will talk to guys that they go, oh, I've played soccer for 2 decades. I play footy for a decade. I went through the amateurs, and now I'm in the seniors team. But I find it in a lot of ways, it seems like, at least in our sport, in martial arts, there's a lot of guys that go, well, I did it for 18 months, I did it for 24 months, and completely walk away from it. And there doesn't seem to be, I guess, in a lot of respects, the depth of senior guys that we would see in other sports. Am I right in that? And if I am, why do you think that is?
I mean, it probably is just the toll that it takes on the body. And then probably, the way things are divided up in in competitions for soccer or something like that, I'm sure that once you reach a certain age, you're not competing or training with the 20-year-olds who are looking to go pro or something like that. They're probably in different categories, different training sessions, where in jiu-jitsu it still might be expected we're all on the same mat, and maybe that 20-year-old who wants to go pro decides that, well, I want to beat this person who has more experience than me, higher rank than me, maybe more historical accolades than me, and can go after them. And it is acceptable, probably,
It's
as
brutal, isn't it?
as they should. It's brutal, right? And you just don't see that in I think other sports, and that can be, eventually I think guys can just get over that, essentially, and like, well, I've done my time, I've learned some skills, I've had some fun, but I don't really want to keep rolling with a target on my back, or just even if it's just injuries or something like that. So it's a big point, because it's something I want to really make sure that the culture is, that the recognition that people who have been doing it a long time probably have knowledge that they can share, and that they bring value into remaining at training, and that they can be a resource to help the younger practitioners, and that it shouldn't be a default that eventually, as the situation you're describing, take place, where people just decide to hang it up, which they could do for many reasons, but being chased off, or just, not given their appropriate respect, is being one of those.
Mm. When through your breakdowns as well, those breakdowns you've been doing evolved into a couple of other things. Again, I didn't even know it was your content. I started looking at a Fedor seminar, and then a Habib seminar popped up in their original Russian languages. And who do I find has been the mastermind to subtitle these for all of our enjoyments? But it's you again. I can assume that that's a lot of work, and I can assume that there's not much profit that comes off the back of that. So what becomes sort of the motivation, or who do you even approach to say, hey, look, I found this hour-long seminar. I need someone to go out and subtitle it, and I guess just doing something pretty selfless for the martial arts community to pick up some knowledge and enjoy.
Yeah, so that there was a time when I found a Russian who would offer to translate stuff for me. And so I just had these Fedor seminars that I'd watched, or these Habib clips that I'd watched, and just trying to figure out what they were showing, and really wanted to understand what they were saying to see if I could garner some more insight through it. So just sent them over. And then that was also information that I used when I was doing my breakdowns on them. So it was part of the research process, I guess, before doing a breakdown, just try and get as much information as I could on the fighter itself. And that was, I guess, probably going an extra step for the Russian fighters.
Yeah. So, because I remember these victory books that you talked about, which were effectively like picture books of all the moves that would come out there. But now you're starting to uncover like historical, something like 1920s black and white footage. Where is this coming from? Because this almost feels like a new depth to what you're doing compared to previously, of really walking into this from coach to historian space.
Yeah, so it probably started, I guess, sometime during COVID lockdown, where had extra extra time to go into new avenues. And I'd seen there was a video online where someone had restored footage of like early 1900s New York, and they'd restored it, colorized it, and I was like, that was really cool. I want to know how to do this, which is how a lot of things happen. I will see something and think, oh, that's cool, I want to give it a shot. And so I found a tutorial on how to do it, and I knew that there was some old footage that I'd seen of catch wrestling and such like that beforehand. There was some on YouTube, and then archive.org is another good resource for it. And I just started working on those ones, and also the original footage from Kimura versus Helio Gracie as well. And so I just started going down that rabbit hole and just trying to see what footage I could possibly find and restore to what level of quality and colorize and kind of give it new life. And then also what I've got enjoyment from is also when these videos have got a lot of views, is like, I think it's cool trying that it's, brought it to a whole new audience and people who may have never seen it before, and probably would turn off a grainy black and white bit of film or something, but they're able to, that captures their attention, and just to spread that understanding of how long some of these arts go back.
Mm. I spoke with another gentleman who's up here by the name of Paul Cupid, who trains up at one of the gyms called Alpha, and he's a bit of a boxing historian, and he gave me a really good interview. And again, I was completely unaware of this because, probably like you, it's like I don't mind boxing, but it was really MMA that got me into combat sports, and they're quite different to view. But he was explaining to me that when you go back to, I guess, probably 1940s and before that, of just how light training boxers did, because they were fighting much more regularly, but also the usage of a lot more clinch-based tactics, framing and overnight and really dirty stuff, that trying to think, so maybe Jack Dempsey would close space and actually come in with his elbow over the top and knock people out over the ropes. I guess, did you uncover a lot of that? Because I hadn't been aware of how much clinch action had actually been in old school boxing around the turn of the century, sort of thing.
Yeah, a lot of it. A lot of the modern dirty boxing techniques, or and it's just called dirty boxing as it's outside of the rule set, but it was just boxing before, for a while. So a lot of that clinch fighting, guys like Jack Johnson, I think Sandy Sadler, Archie Moore, did a lot of clinch fighting that really resembles what you would see in modern MMA. And part of the hope, actually, I think with a lot of people, was when this bare knuckle boxing kind of made a bit of a comeback, that we might have seen a bit more of that, and that we might see some of those old tactics come back. But unfortunately, that really hasn't seemed to be the case. It's really just modern boxing, but just people getting cut up and a bit more. So, but yeah, there's there was a lot more clinch fighting going on in the early boxing era.
It's interesting because when you look at bare knuckle and BKFC, as you said, it was pointed out to me. It said, well, with that, they can get in there and fight, maybe collar tie and punch, and it hasn't materialized. And by that same token, I'm quite surprised that they continue to use grapplers as opposed to boxers for it. Do you think it's just maybe that today more UFC athletes have name recognition? Is that sort of why as an example, like Giant Silva doing bare knuckle boxing, it doesn't quite make a lot of sense to me in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Well, I think it's also that for some reason they've got a bit of money and they're able just to attract those people. Then I think the other thing is probably a lot of those styles, clinching styles and stuff like that, may have arisen due to people being far more cautious of particular injuries, which would have, the medical field being able to heal things and stitch things up and everything wouldn't have been, as far advanced. Whereas now people kind of, I think, would just, throw caution to the wind and know that the hospital will be able to take care of it afterwards in a relatively, decent fashion. So I think there are those, cultural influences around, and even medical science influences that then actually influence on the techniques themselves. So I think, you know, but the grapplers being drawn over is you know, is probably just the money that these guys have, that they're not going to be able to get in probably grappling on its own.
Mm. You mentioned Jack Johnson. Many years ago, I got hold of the documentary. Is it Unforgivable Blackness? I think
It's
is
an
the big.
excellent
It's
documentary.
one
Yeah.
of the best I've ever seen. Without knowing much about him prior to that, and you know, and from there I explored, and I really hadn't. To me, it seems like an overlooked piece of Australian history, where because
Yeah.
the first black champion to come out of boxing happens here in Sydney in Rushcutters Bay in was it 1906 Boxing Day? I
I
want
think
to say
so. Yeah.
somewhere around there, and no one had ever told me the story, and I haven't heard it from anyone since. And to me, it's I mean, as a Canadian, who did he beat? Was it Jim Corbett that he beat for? Who was a Canadian fighter, avoided
Oof.
fighting him? So
I'm
it's
blanking at the moment.
it's kind of like this dual Canadian Australian thing that you see behind me. But I'm really surprised that this hasn't been kind of recognized as a larger piece of Australian history. I mean, I guess what do you think about that?
Yeah, actually, I think the name, I think maybe it was Tommy
It
Burns,
was
but
Burns. I'm sorry. Yes.
um, uh, yeah, I was fascinated when I found that out too. That it was, what, this happened just up the road, you know. So I think they've put a plaque up there now,
A couple of years ago.
only a couple of years ago to kind of commemorate it. But of course, for such a significant bout to happen on Boxing Day as well, you know, you'd think that there would that be that, you know, widespread recognition or just for such a historical moment. As to why it's been just kind of ignored, you know, I don't know for sure. You know, it's probably just got to be cultural. But and then just I guess a lot of things from that era were ignored as well. So,
Mm.
but I think it's a real shame. I think it really should, especially people in fight sports, should be more aware of it.
Yeah, it's just find it so bizarre. Well, I mean, the arena doesn't exist anymore. It's like there's no traces of it. As you said,
Mm.
there's a small plaque that's been put over there, but beyond that, it seems lost to history. Um, all right, Gracie's and Machado's. So I think as we mentioned before, you and I both come from this Machado lineage as it came into Australia. You know, at the heart of it, we know Machados are Gracies. They all come from the same family, but they seem to have spun off into uh, I guess theologically and how they pursue things a little bit different. What's your take on sort of Gracie's and Machados and how they've converged in their own way, converged or
Yeah,
diverted rather?
yeah, sure. So I think probably just at a larger level, it seems like the Machados as a whole were just more open-minded, and that has kind of led to, you know, people kind of taking, you know, taking jujitsu and then being able to express it in their own ways. So I mean, you'll find a lot of obviously with John Will, you know, having many schools in Australia that are Machado based. And then also and then allowing those schools to kind of express themselves, you know, how they want. You know, there's a lot of people who, you know, in Australia who have a Machado background, and but it may not be as well known or recognized, whereas or they've, you know, they've taken on their own names, whereas, you know, I think the Gracies have been much more structured and, you know, regimented and kind of defined, so that if, you know, if someone's come from a Gracie school, it's probably much more well known that it is Gracie itself than Machado. So I think at, you know, at a broad level, that is probably how I see things, with the Machados being a bit more open-minded, a bit more open, and then the Gracies being a bit more regimented, which is, I think, probably necessary for the growth of jiu-jitsu to get to that point. And, you know, and help it spread around the world. So that's, you know, at a wide level, that's how I see the split be.
Mm. So does that mean because I've never been affiliated with Gracie. I've been Machado since I came over here. So does that mean sort of the Gracie, as far as you would know, are a little bit more based still in that Gracie's combative self-defense style of jiu-jitsu?
Yeah, I think there'll be a lot more, just as a general thing. Again, you know, more focus on self-defense, and the focus on, you know, that being what Gracie Jiu-Jitsu used to spread itself throughout the world. and so I definitely think there's a focus on it there. Then, because at the, I think with the brothers too, they've kind of the Machado brothers, they've all kind of gone in their own separate routes, doing their own things. You've got Hegan now. I think, having a success with his celebrity jiu-jitsu, program, and, John Jarks and Carlos and John, they've all doing their own separate things, and they seem, I would say as a whole, I think they also seem, all quite happy, which I think is a good goal too, that they seem happy, whereas maybe the Gracies, you hear at least a lot more drama within that family circle itself. So maybe that regimented and trying to stick to that a structure could possibly be, and one indication of things there, whereas that open-mindedness has allowed that kind of happiness to flourish. But they've, the Machados themselves, I mean, one thing we can say is there doesn't seem to be many high-level competitors or anything coming out of those schools, or just as a general thing. So I think that they are now more focused on just being happy, having fun doing jiu-jitsu, and having fun teaching it, which I think is interesting as well.
Mm. Sport BJJ, and I guess the way that it's evolved now, because you do commentary for Subversion as well. It seems I was probably behind the curve, and I'm still behind the curve when it comes to the modern leg lock game, and I don't think I'll ever get particularly good at it now that I'm into my 40s, and guard inversion, all that stuff. It's like alien science to me in a lot of respects. But I sort of remember this turning a curve around 2010. But a lot of guys were saying, like, around 2005 was actually when De La Hiva and stuff like that was coming in. But I was only starting out then. When do you remember a time, or I guess can you pinpoint a particular year or something when you started to notice the game really drastically changing from, I guess, the way that you and I started and the way that we still teach, which is passing the hips and kind of throwing that game plan out the window?
Yeah, I mean, I really think that the modern game, you have to ascribe to, John Danaher and his systems, and how he's kind of changed things, which started with leg locks, but has just changed pretty much, how everything operates at the high level. I think, you could give a nod to Eddie Bravo as well, obviously, with, a popularization of no-gi, not doing no-gi only. And, he did probably have one of at least the first systems that I saw with his books fully flow charted out and everything like that. And also providing the stage, I guess, to the Danaher Death Squad early on. But whatever year that was, where the Danaher Death Squad was competing at ABI, I think that really, from then on,
That was the breakout year, was it?
I think so. And then, I don't think we can overlook just how much that influenced things from then on.
How do you think about, or I guess theoretically, what's your thoughts on learning a system like that for the longer term? Because as I said, like, you're soon to be 40. I'm already into my 40s. If you're developing this as your game from the time that you're 18, do you think, guard inversion and K guard and all these other things are feasible in the long term of being able to practice or train this?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because something I've thought about myself, where a lot of the techniques are, we look at the techniques that the professionals are doing and expect kind of, as a whole, everyone should be able to do them. But these are, professional athletes showing you what they're doing that are normally, nutritionally enhanced with some excellent supplements. And they're also willing to make large sacrifices for the longevity of their career, or, all their bodies, to be able to compete at the high levels. So it's, if we're just taking everything they're doing wholesale and having the understanding that we should do it, without quite fully understanding if we are prepared to make the same sacrifices, then I think things can be problematic. The way that they're able to or willing to just let things submissions get deep and potentially have injuries get
Mm.
caused during matches and stuff like that. We can't look at that as the regular way to do the sport. We have to understand that these people have decided to make the decision to be a professional and make make that sacrifice, that there's going to be potentially broken bones or long-term injuries or stuff like that with the pursuit of these techniques. And we just, unless people are at least aware that that's the sacrifice that they're going to have to make, then I don't think we should just wholesale take everything that they're doing in the matches and just unquestionably implement it and replicate it. I think we just have to at least be aware of those things, and especially with the issues of supplements and things like that.
So if anyone's, I guess, on the peripheral of this, we're really talking about leg locks these days, and for the most part, generally giving up top position to seek them out. I guess is what we're talking about with it. So there's probably a lot of ways to go into this conversation, because I find this part fascinating, because it's so different to the purpose of why I came into the sport, was to effectively learn fighting skills. And this, while it is a fighting skill, there's a lot of things in terms of, giving up position, being on the bottom, that is very different, I guess, to the way that would have been taught. So while we're talking about this, probably the first point is, as you mentioned, a lot of guys are doing this now, and they are ending up in a competition on a Saturday. Somebody who's in the gym 5 days, twice a week, practicing this against a hobbyist who comes in twice a week, who's being told by his gym to go out and get some experience, and then coming off the mats with ruptured knees and sort of things like that. Are we sort of at a point, or how do we try to look at this a little bit more, where not all blue belts are equal, not all purple belts are equal, not all browns and not all blacks are equal? How do we try to find some level of equalization as the sport grows?
Yeah, I think now I'm not fully. I don't have a full understanding of how this works, but I believe one of the best things I've seen as a counter to everyone competing in belt rank is that at least having a division that's kind of separated by how chess does their rankings. I believe they have power rankings, or where if you beat certain people, your average ranking goes up, and then you're matched up in accordance with that ranking. So it's kind of based just on skills over how you do in matches themselves. And I think that could be a potential way to kind of level the playing fields out. I mean, local tournaments now kind of will group it into maybe 3 categories for nogi, with based on years training and things like that. But even those are not the best measure of someone's skill level, or how they want to or how much they're training, or how serious they're taking it to compete. So I don't think that there is a better solution other than perhaps this chess ranking way. So I kind of think that at least the current belt ranking at least provides a rough guide that's probably the best of a bad lot.
I think it's so different, because it's like, when I compare the two, it's like I would prefer to be knocked out than to go into a competition and have my leg torn off, where I'm then in surgery and I require a year to rehab. And I think it's just it's so different now, where you got to pay an admission fee, you got to wait to get on the mats, and then you just get your leg ripped apart for something that you do as a hobby. It's very, it's different. It's just different to the way that I grew up looking this, where I'm trying to think about who explored that idea, and they were saying that fundamentally it's changed the way BJJ is, because originally BJJ was about being able to hold someone on the ground. That doesn't matter at all now, because you're immediately going to the butt scoop position with the expectation of somebody engaging you. I mean, to me, they're almost like 180. Where do you think this will, I guess, kind of advance to? Because you hear guys like Danaher talking about how this is going to evolve back into the stand-up game, but if it's just a traditional BJJ no-gi match, you can pull guard automatically. It really seems the need or desire for any forms of takedown isn't there anymore.
Yeah, so this is, I guess this is something that I've thought about, which is like, the way that leg locks were kind of frowned upon from the Gracies, which can be traced back to, I believe it was a challenge match that they had against Oswaldo Fada competitors, and they all leg locked the Gracies, I believe,
Okay.
against Helio Gracie's school, and
And were they like
kind
luta livre guys or something along?
no, they were just different jiu-jitsu style. But then there was also the lucha libre, battles themselves, and I think that we can kind of look at that as being, perhaps a cause for leg locks to be frowned on. Oh, they beat us with it, so maybe that was a bit of the cause. But then also, perhaps it was also the levels of injuries that they knew. So they were, in the terms of spreading the sport, they knew that if people are getting seriously injured with leg locks, which do take longer to recover from if there is serious injuries, being, load bearing joints than even arm bars or such. They knew perhaps that would hamper the development of the sport as well. So that's how they took things out. And now that's kind of everything's, all of those reasons that maybe, or limitations that maybe the Gracies had put on it in their regimented style, being kind of removed and just allowed to be more free expression of jiu-jitsu just for the techniques themselves. There is a part of me that wonders if that will end up, negatively impacting the sport in the long term, if it just becomes, smother chokes are back in fashion again now, which again, that was, it was only 6 months ago, and that wasn't considered real jiu-jitsu. That was just dirty catch wrestling. And now people are smothering people from mount, every day, like Gordon Ryan, and that's now fine. And if all these techniques that had kind of been frowned upon and kept out culturally all kind of come back in, and we look at it as the evolution of the sport, but there's a part of me that wonders, well, if they all go back in, is that going to end up actually negatively impacting the development of the sport in a certain way? And there's nothing to say that it will, other than just a curiosity on it, I guess.
A few months ago, I spoke to Larry Papadopoulos, and he believes that wrist locks are going to be the one to come back into form, which is not much that we play with at all, because it's always been designed for punching and grappling to support that. But what do you think that means? Or I guess rather, what I'm alluding to is all of this seems to be spinning off and completely diverging from what Gracie Jiu-Jitsu was created, the blueprint for how you use grappling in a combat situation to win a fight when somebody's punching you. This stuff looks completely different, and we haven't. Some guys have been able to do it. Dean Lister was sort of in the early UFC guys. Gary Tonon's made it work for him. We've seen Ryan Hall seems to have his number figured out now in the UFC. Do you think at some point this will actively become, I guess, a specialty that can take someone there, or is it too far removed from what's actually happening in a cage fight?
Yeah, I think eventually it's going to have to be too far removed, just with the development it's and way things are going. If you want to get good at no-gi jiu-jitsu, you're probably going to have to develop a game that is just shifting away for what's useful in MMA so much. I think as you're getting at the what was used to successfully produce jiu-jitsu champions before and spread it around the world was the idea of positions, which was and scoring positions, which was based on your ability to get struck from certain positions, which now, especially sub-only rules, it just doesn't matter as much. So it's, while people can modify their game. I mean, even I think, from a certain era, the whole point of training jiu-jitsu was, to have a MMA fight and kind of test jiu-jitsu against other arts. And, and people I train with from that era, it's like everyone had a fight at least,
Yes.
just to try and test it. There's, they might not talk about it or, make a big deal of it. It was just one fight, but it was kind of everyone almost had just one. Whereas now that the opportunities in the sport itself are there, that just to test your jiu-jitsu against other jiu-jitsu, that people can just take that avenue and seek fulfillment from it. So I think the rise of it as a spectator sport too, at least in terms of ADCC, I think being the model of filling out a stadium of just people wanting to watch no-gi jiu-jitsu, that if that keeps happening, I don't think it'll ever reach crossover for people who don't train wanting to watch it, but if it can still if it can still fill stadiums or arenas or whatever just for people wanting to watch jiu-jitsu itself, I think that's going to inevitably take it away from its usefulness within an MMA context.
Sure. So you're saying we won't see the Just Bleed guy show up to ADCC?
I don't want to make any broad claims like that, because that guy's a legend.
So I think I alluded to this, or I think I asked you, we weren't too particular, but as I said, you're commenting for these sorts of events and you're actively watching them and teaching us. Where do you sort of see this headed to? We are seeing this divergence, but now when it comes to, open guard, to raising the butterfly, to getting underneath them, even deep half seems like a weird position to me in terms of, the way that they're using it. Some guys are actively using it in MMA, but when we talk about no-gi jiu-jitsu, what do you think this is going to, because it's now about stopping leg locks. So where do you see this kind of evolution potentially headed next?
Yeah, so I mean, a big thing that's happening is using leg locks to take the back. Is something that happened, I guess, more over the last year. Whereas people defend leg locks and are turning out, people are wrestling up and taking the back from there. So I mean, that's probably something that's already happening. In terms of where it could go, that's I'm not too sure on where the next evolution could possibly be. The thing that is fascinating me is all the the individual techniques, like even the finishing chokes from the back now, just turning into face cranks and face chokes, they're calling it, which fine, I guess, but it's just those techniques that were perhaps frowned upon or considered not good jiu-jitsu now, or all of a sudden good jiu-jitsu, that I just find interesting.
It's just getting nasty all around,
Yeah.
isn't it? All the manners that were out of like good jiu-jitsu practice just been thrown out the door these days.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Within the videos as well, as I said, probably, I don't know when it was, maybe over the last 5 years, we've really started to see catch wrestling has made a name for itself. And again, it wasn't something that I was aware of. I just started hearing a little bit more of it. Some guys like Randy Couture are absolutely fully on the bandwagon now. I think they're integrating it over at Extreme Couture. I honestly can't remember when and where I started hearing about it, but Eric Paulson is the name I've always associated with this, going back, and Josh Barnett and then Sakuraba. That's probably the earliest, but it just it seems like this sort of very new wave jiu-jitsu, it has just come out of nowhere, and it seems to have piqued your interest as well, because it is based a little bit more. Its usage seems to translate a lot more over to MMA of taking that top position. So take me how it sort of crossed your desk, and I guess what you're thinking of it now for the purposes of grappling.
Yeah, so I mean, that was very much when I was doing just research and stuff like that, coming across those books, and then being just seeing those techniques like leg locks and stuff happening in 1890 or whatever it is, and just realizing, oh, there's a whole nother lineage or history with these things. And then the more I read, the more fascinated I got with it, and then tracing it through to the modern era, which understanding its role in the development of MMA in Japan, with Pancrase and Shudo all having influence from catch wrestling, and then even coming from that jiu-jitsu background, just kind of not knowing about it, and then finding out about it, and you realize, oh yeah, how did when I was watching Choke with Rickson Gracie, it's like, oh, how did Yuki Nakai know to go for a heel hook? Like, where was he learning this if he was against jiu-jitsu? Like, how did he know these techniques? And then kind of looking, digging deeper. But I think and then my fascination started with it because you could see how it just, some of the philosophies just made more sense for MMA, which is, getting top position. And you could see it already taking place where people would turtle to stand up because it was much more important to try and get back on your feet than to play guard where you can be pinned. And I mean, even the use of the word pin now is something that Danaher kind of revolutionized, which now every jiu-jitsu person will understand what a pin is. It was maybe 3 years ago that no one was using it. And I think that that's kind of, in terms of where things are going, is probably one of the biggest things that I've realized is that jiu-jitsu will eventually just consume whatever it it comes in contact with, and which is also the power of jiu-jitsu, that it is just, it will take those things from catch wrestling that are useful and then just implement them, and then all of a sudden they become jiu-jitsu.
Yes.
And so much of that has come from Danaher. I mean, now people understand what a claw grip is, which again, a couple of years ago, no one used that. And now they just, they don't know exactly where it came from, but of course it becomes just a accepted piece of terminology. And, all those moves have a long history in, folk style wrestling in America, in catch wrestling. You can find it. They've been using it for years. And it will just be consumed by jiu-jitsu, I think, and then just become jiu-jitsu is my ultimate understanding now on it, and which is, again, the beauty of jiu-jitsu.
It's interesting because like when the latter half of Damian Maia's career, when you watch Gilbert Burns, they go jiu-jitsu, I go, these guys are just wrestlers now. They are wrestling and then seeking out rear naked chokes effectively. Do you think you'd said, in terms of how big jiu-jitsu is now, it will, it'll create a wave and usurp everything. Do you think it's sort of reached a peak? Like, again, when I look at it historically, it's sort of like when you think about Californian karate in the 1970s or American kickboxing in the 1980s or something like that. Do you think this has long-term sustainability, or do you think we're sort of reaching a peak where other martial arts might, come in and take it over at some point?
Yeah, I think, that's, with the example of, karate in the 80s, or, even all those other martial arts schools, the fact that there are still schools out there that, a wide variety, Kung Fu, Wing Chun, Krav Maga, that there are people still training these martial arts when, to be honest, I figured that, after MMA kind of came on the scene, all these places are going to die off and no one's going to want to do it anymore. But they're still here, and they're still training people and people are still enjoying it, and they're still profitable. I think that even if jiu-jitsu hits a peak, I think there will still be the, people practicing it in a professional manner, no matter what. And that what you realize is with these other martial arts, one thing that they've got well, traditional martial arts, is their ability to, build a culture, build an environment that is welcoming to people and introduce them to the sport in certain ways. And they've had a bit more time to do that. Whereas, I think jiu-jitsu itself, that is something that it can, with being such a wide field of techniques, it can certainly improve on as a general rule. Like, we probably don't want to be showing face chokes on your first day, as I think that would scare people off, and rightly so. So, as these other techniques come into play, just that ability to help people understand what the actual sport is, how it operates, the purpose of it, which again, brings up your point to it, moving away from self-defense. It's very easy to explain positional disadvantages in jiu-jitsu with the ability to get punched in the face. Whereas if you kind of take that away, then people who have never seen the sport and don't really know what it is, or don't have an understanding of certain techniques, it can be a bit more difficult to try and explain why a position could be good or bad. If you can just kipping escape into a leg lock from mount, why would you, what's wrong with being there? So I think that is kind of where the evolution would have to go in terms of the popularity of the sport. But I think that's, as a whole, I think it's still got, it's still got a bit to go. I think they're going to go larger for ADCC. I think Nogi's going to going, still got a while before it hits its peak. And it'll be that will be where things probably continue to rise next. And how much that can be sustained we'll find out.
Okay. When we take this again back to fighting, then I guess the next question is, what are your thoughts on organizations that allow kicking down opponents?
Yeah, I mean, I like watching it. I
Same.
can't. So I can't lie. I mean, I enjoy watching, old school prides and, Shogun Hua, stomping people. It's kind of
It's the rule
exciting.
set in one as well, and
Yeah.
I think it provides, again, I'm just circling this round back of what is jujitsu and what does this mean for all the guys that are diverging training this way if they do want to get into MMA and they're choosing to be on the bottom. They're not wrestling. Again, all jiu-jitsu is done in an open mat space that there's no wall or cage to wrestle against.
Mm. Yeah. So, I mean, I've liked watching it, but I mean, I could probably, if one just, takes the rules out again, I'm probably not going to complain that there's less people getting kicked in the head on the ground. Like that's an acceptable rule to have, even as much as I enjoyed watching Pride and the ONE FC, because some of there was one particular, I think it was Roger Huerta in ONE FC that was just
Oh, he just put the
terrible.
boots to him, didn't he? Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a late. I remember that one because it wasn't only soccer kicking; it was stomps as well. I think was
yeah,
the big thing. Hey, but at least he got a win because he
yeah.
was. I think he was on a bit of a slide at that point.
Yes. So, I can watch that and say, oh, okay, we don't really need to see that, but yeah, I mean, it does change the game dramatically. I mean, one of the biggest things is definitely the front headlock position when you can knee to a grounded opponent. So front headlock and north-south position when you can knee to a grounded opponent become probably one of the more, or two of the more devastating positions you can secure in MMA, which for striking, which with those rules taken out, they're actually not very advantageous at all in terms of striking. So those are the two positions that really change things. I mean, you could just Mayhem Miller did a lot in his early career, where you could just get to north south and just lift your hips up and knee to the head.
Yeah, fair.
So those are the two spots I'd really consider.
Well, there's a few fights from that Pride era. Like I think the most brutal one that I remember was Arona Sakuraba in that position.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think, Coleman finished Vovchanchyn for the first Pride GP there.
Yep.
And I feel like Vovchanchyn did it to Mark Kerr as well, if I'm not mistaken, around that time. And but yeah, it's like a stuffed shoot can be
Yeah.
the death toll, can't it?
Yeah.
It's a good place to segue to in modern wrestling. And I said, this is one of the questions I want to ask you about. To me, it feels like we are not seeing traditional double legs in MMA anymore. I was saying, I think Curtis Blades is probably one of the few guys that I feel like still bases a game. There's still a couple guys in Bellator because Bellator takes longer, that they seem to develop guys a little bit longer. And it seems to me that a lot of it more is back to body lock clinching with some sort of variation of a takedown from there into a single or into a back take. You've been noticing as well, it just seems like the amount of effort required for like a blast double isn't worth it to a lot of guys these days.
Yeah, so I think, a big part is the effort required to finish a takedown like that, and then the ability then to maintain control on the ground is a bit more difficult. So if you can take someone down off a trip with a body lock, then you've already got a chest to chest connection.
Yeah.
And able to control a bit better once it hits the mat. Another thing that I think we're seeing is just, from single legs trips where just off balancing, just to try and get people's hands onto the mat and then chasing the back from there. So I think it is, just driven by that element of control once it hits the mat. And just trying to, make that as advantageous as possible. So I think that's something that a lot more jiu-jitsu people are doing, just trying to, in MMA, just trying to off balance, get hands on the mat and seek the back from there is something that's happening. So, and that's part of, as people are getting better defending, as people are using the wall to get up a lot better, that that's just where the evolution's gone.
Mm. That's if I'm not that's effectively how Chandler lost the fight against Poirier, wasn't it? Didn't he effectively shoot in, and then they had so much force that they kind of rolled over on the mat, and I think Poirier took his back from there. So if I'm not
I
mistaken.
can't remember that exactly. I did watch it, but blanking on it.
All right. So as we said, heel hooks are where sport BJJ is at. We just had the UFC on the weekend, but effectively at the moment, and for the last couple of years, we've all been talking about Dagestani wrestling. Um, that seems to be where the UFC is at the moment. I guess before we talk about where you think that'll go from that, give me in your opinion, what is the core of what makes their wrestling game plan a little bit different from what we might have seen previously?
Sure. So, I mean, I think really what makes the core is their culture of wrestling for so long, and just wrestling from such a young age, and then coming up in that environment. In terms of the actual techniques itself, I really feel that it was its exposure to American folk style wrestling that caused it to kind of take the shape, especially with Habib, of what we really consider his style.
So sorry, do you mean him moving over here to like train at AKA and the exposure to
Yeah,
that? Is that okay?
yeah.
All right.
I,
So
I I really think that is, and his exposure to, Daniel Cormier, perhaps, even if it wasn't necessarily like information or techniques that they showed him, it would have been that having to deal with those problems that the folk style wrestlers were giving him that influenced the style that we kind of see or associate with it, like, the inside wrist rides and things like that we see take place in in the UFC, and kind of what we associate with that top pressure. So I think it's just that long background, and culture, and strong wrestling culture that they come from, with then the exposure to American folk style wrestling techniques that kind of influence what we consider, at least in the MMA scene, as their particular style.
So my takeaway from this whole thing is there isn't Dagestani wrestling. It's just Daniel Cormier again.
Yeah.
Doing
I
it.
I mean, probably hard to undersell his influence, I'm sure. But there is, they do have a particular style on the world stage, and where they're still incredibly successful. So we can't say it's not, but it's just what we see in MMA. I think it is in somewhat a reaction to the problems that they had initially coming in and facing some of the American wrestlers.
Okay. Well, we'll just talk about the fights a little bit more, and then we'll start to wind down for today. If we were talking about some of this pride activity, I mean, there's, it's probably only old schoolers like myself
Yeah.
that remember this, but Shogun was what 3 weeks ago,
Yep.
lost in the UFC. Fedor has had his retirement fight 2 weeks ago now,
Yeah.
in Bellator. They're done. That is effectively the last of the great Pride champions that I can think of, from that era. It is now done and dusted.
Mm-hmm.
What do you sort of remember about that time? And I guess I'll ask a follow-up question after that. But I mean, this to me, this is what brought me into the sport,
Yeah.
originally.
Yeah. I mean, at least for me, it was that, just how many individual characters there seem to be, where now it's very hard for people in the UFC, at least, to kind of break out and separate themselves from the rest of the pack, where there was so much personal expression with the fighters in Pride, with entrances and just iconic shorts that they would wear or something like that, and just the ability to kind of put their personality across themselves, which I would attribute to somewhat carryover from professional wrestling in Japan, which is then, can go back to catch wrestling again, which has kind of been, deliberately removed from the UFC, I think, and somewhat homogenized. That I think is a real shame, because there was just, you see it, I guess, with Ryzen, just that pageantry and celebration of the individual fighters themselves for who they are, that was kind of quite sad to see Fedor go out like that, I'll say.
It's I mean, it was to be expected, to be
Yeah.
honest, but it's a pretty unforgiving sport. Where okay, so Fedor's now a point of contention. So is he the greatest heavyweight of all time? Is it Stipe, or you know, to me, guys like Kane are right in that conversation as well. What do you sort of think about these guys?
Yeah, I think like if you probably just look at, in terms of, it's different when you look at the different eras, because clearly guys like Kane fought, better competition in terms of, their opponent's skill levels and his own skill level, but just the breadth of what Fedor was able to accomplish still puts him as the GOAT for me. But I get that's just the issue with comparing people from different times.
Mm.
I mean, what he was able to do over such a long period of time was just truly incredible. Whereas there might, Stipe had a shorter run, or well, he's still, who knows how much longer he will go for, but and probably beat people of a higher skill level caliber. But just in the context of the time, I think it's still got to be Fedor.
I'm not sure. I think so too, but I'm not sure. I think he had the longest run though. I think it was like 7 years or
Yeah,
something along those lines, which I think
and
is
there were
really
some great fighters in there, but there was also,
Zulahino and
yeah,
uh,
exactly.
Ogawa and a few other guys.
you
Yeah,
know, so we can't put them on the same pedestal as some of
true,
these other
true.
competitors.
Okay, this weekend, I'm glad that we got to do the interview with you today, because we've seen the culmination of possibly one of the greatest fights that we've seen all time. Just yesterday, at least over here in Australia, yeah, UFC 284, Makhachev and Volkanovski. Nobody gave Volkanovski a chance. Again, I was probably initially in that camp, but over the couple of weeks, I got very, very bullish on the way that he just talked right to the camera, and he goes, no, because I'm going to smash this guy. And it wasn't, you could tell it wasn't hyperbole. You could tell he honestly believed that he was just going to walk in there and dispatch that guy. And this fight was close. I think
Mm.
uh, Makhachev, I think I gave one, two, possibly up in the air, and four, but I definitely gave 3 and 5 to Volk. And as I said to you, I think Volkanovski did not win that match, but he certainly didn't lose it. And I think it's one of those things that's deserving of an immediate rematch, where I think Volk could win. What were your sort of takeaway thoughts from this?
Yeah, no, I agree there, and I would love to see an immediate rematch. I have to go back and watch the fight again today, because I think yesterday I was watching it through Volk colored glasses.
Screaming.
Where, yeah, I think my bias, because in my mind I really thought Volk had won it going into the judges' decision. I think probably 2, 3, and 5 taking those rounds, but and I thought he outstruck him, but I was probably heavily biased on my initial watching. I got into it as a fan and maybe not looking at it so objectively. So I'll
Mm.
have to go back and watch it again. But I think either way, there's no way that anyone should doubt Volkanovski's talent or potential in anything he decides to challenge himself with. What he was able to do coming up in weight from his normal division now to really give it to Islam, speaks volumes. I know that they've put Islam now as the pound for pound number one, which I don't think makes complete sense, considering Volk was the guy coming up in weight and gave Islam a hell of a
Agreed.
battle.
Agreed.
That's that I think if they do an immediate rematch, which would be awesome, I'd love to see it. The only downside, it puts those two divisions on hold. But it's just the way Volkanovski was able to get back up, out wrestle, even going for his own takedowns, really, taking that mystique away from Islam. I mean, I'm just so impressed with what he did.
I'd like to see the rematch too, because I think Yair ends up being technically being a worse matchup for, with all the spinning kicks from the outside. I think is not great. I thought there was some. Oh, I was watching Chael Sonnen last night, because he went straight to broadcast after this, and he was saying that we need to review some of this, because Makhachev's sitting on his back, not really actively attacking, and Volkanovski's sitting there just pumping this fist into his head and landing 20, 30 clean shots. And he goes, so that should have been a Volk round. This sort of begs the question. I mean, if you've gone back and watched this far, that this takes me right back to when Boss was on the bottom of Kevin Randleman in UFC 20 and still came away with the victory. I mean, how do you sort of score something like that where even though the guy is in a disadvantaged position, he's still the one attacking?
Yeah, so maybe I got to go back and check the rules, but my understanding of it was that now that control in itself, or like takedowns in itself, doesn't score if there's more damage done in a position. So I mean, that's a hard case to make when the control is so dominant. But my understanding was that it's now control itself is not rewarded. It's its own reward is to increase your ability to score damage. But I might have that wrong because because I mean, I think that would put that, Volk's ability to pepper him with shots ahead. But I don't think the control there is so dominant that they probably should win as well.
All right. So as we begin to wrap this up, but when we look at this kind of picture as a whole, then who are, we come to you as the expert. We watch the Sonny Brown breakdowns. Who's who are those greats? Who are the top 5 MMA guys in Sonny Brown's opinion?
Yeah, so the number one is GSP, without a doubt, I think. Just the model that he put forward is just incredible. And I mean, to be honest, recency bias, but I think Volker will have his spot there, no matter what, at some point. Just even if he's perhaps still a bit criminally overlooked, he's still got plenty of time left to go, and just what he's been able to achieve is pretty incredible. I think it's Conor's a tough one. I think what he was able to do to change things in terms of the industry as a whole has to be respected. Likewise, Ronda Rousey, I think they kind of have their place, just as they had technical excellence in specific areas, and just as how they were able to impact the sport as a whole was incredible. And then you got to put Royce on that level as well. I think other people technically wise, I put GSP on there twice. He is the man when it comes to it.
Yeah, right. Interesting list. There are a few names I'm quite surprised that didn't pop up on there. All right. So we'll finish off with this. We got a couple of guys. We got someone leaving the UFC and someone coming back in. What does this mean for Francis Ngannou? Is he going to pursue? I don't think the boxing routes. I think the debate has been done and settled. MMA guys do not perform well at the highest level of boxing. I don't think they don't understand the traps and all the other particularities that boxers have. Studying that, of course, they can do well on these mid-range cards, as we've seen with like Aldo and Vitor and a whole bunch of other guys. But what do you think that sort of does for Ngannou and I guess his legacy?
Yeah, I mean, I hope he gets a massive payday in some form or another to take a chance boxing, and hey, he's going to have a chance to, he's going to have that puncher's chance as such, or you put anyone to sleep, I'm sure, if he connects. But it's similar to jiu-jitsu with no gi and MMA. If you're spending all your time focusing and specializing on one particular sport, then your advantages are just going to be so much in that area that it's going to be hard for anyone to come in and overtake it if they've been splitting their time between multiple goals and multiple disciplines. So I'm sure as you said, he'd be able to beat many mid-level opponents, but just the fascination or thoughts that they're going to come in and immediately beat the best person in the world in a individual discipline is just so difficult a task to actually accomplish that I wouldn't be expecting it. But I guess it's also that reason that it becomes a fascinating topic and and gets people to tune in and watch.
Well, the last 2 guys that are coming back in are 2 of the biggest names in our sport. I don't know, John Jones has been gone for like a decade. I don't know how long, 6, 7 years. He's finally feels like he's bulked up to the point that he's comfortable of coming back in. And of course, we missed the fights that we were expecting it to come into, which was Stipe first and then Ngannou. So we've now got Cyril. personally, I think he's going to be as dominant as he ever was. I don't think this is going to affect him in any way. I think he's still got just so many advantages over everyone. And if he's going to have trouble with heavier strikers, as long as they don't knock him out, he's just going to take him down. What do you reckon he's going to do once he's back?
Yeah, there is that question just because he's been out for such a long time, but I would think I would still be picking him over Cyril. Just the way Cyril went for that footlock is it turned me off his
Yes.
ability, his ring awareness.
Yes. Okay. Fair enough. And then Conor's back. I honestly don't think there's a better matchup that could have been booked for him. I think this is just because it's whether or not Chandler can bum rush him and knock him out, or whether Conor keeps him at range and does an equivalent. I think this fight can be an absolute banger.
Yeah. I mean, that's I think, Conor's the prime of Conor is probably on the way out, or is probably done. I don't think he's probably going to make that, that historic run he did. I think is, now history. But yeah, I mean, I think he could still put Chandler away if he's able to kind of put it together.
Fair enough. Look, that's all I got for you today, Sonny. We're out of here by noon today. I said I've reached out to you a couple times, so I really appreciate
Yeah,
you
no.
coming
Thank
down to
you.
do this. And as I said, we're only an hour away, so the next thing is now to actually have you come out
Yeah.
and say hello and maybe do a little bit of training with us up here.
Yeah, that'd be a pleasure.
All right, cool. Any final thoughts or anything you want to add before we sign off?
No, just if you're interested, sonnybrown.net is the website to go to, and I got links to everything I do up there. And yeah, thank you very much for having me on today.
More than welcome. I hope we can do it again, and we'll explore some other topics in due course.
Awesome.
All right, thanks very much.
Thanks so much.